The city that evening was painted in liquid gold, the sun folding itself gently into the horizon as though reluctant to leave behind its warm embrace. Along the riverside, where the air carried the scent of water and wild jasmine, a girl sat quietly at a weathered wooden bench, sketchbook balanced on her lap. The world hurried past her, buses humming, footsteps scattering across the cobblestones, laughter echoing from a nearby café. But she remained still, as if time itself paused to watch her draw. Her hand moved with the delicate rhythm of someone who had found refuge in creation, her eyes reflecting not just the river's glimmer, but the hidden ache of years that had quietly shaped her heart. A stranger paused only a few steps away, drawn not by the beauty of the fading sunset, but by the way her presence seemed to bend the world around her into stillness. He was tall, his posture bearing both ease and weight, as though he carried untold stories within him. His gaze lingered not on her hands, but on the softness of her expression, the way she seemed to pour herself into every line on the page. It wasn't infatuation, it was recognition, the rare pull of seeing someone who unknowingly mirrored the very solitude he had long buried. He hesitated, caught between respect and desire to step closer, until the quiet sound of graphite breaking startled her. She looked up suddenly, and their eyes collided. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic gasp from the universe, yet the moment felt infinite. She blinked, caught off guard by the intensity of eyes that looked at her not with pity, nor with empty admiration, but with an honesty she hadn't known she needed. He offered the smallest of smiles, almost hesitant, as though afraid any sudden movement might shatter the fragile thread between them. Something inside her chest trembled, not fear, but the soft awareness that life had shifted, even if imperceptibly. "Sorry," he murmured, though he had done nothing to apologize for. She shook her head gently, and for the first time in years her lips curved into a smile that wasn't forced. He saw it, and in that instant the world grew lighter. The burdens each of them carried did not disappear, but they eased, if only for the length of a shared glance. Healing, it seemed, could begin in the most unexpected places. A riverside bench, a broken pencil, a stranger's gaze. The sound of evening bells from a nearby chapel broke their silence. He took a cautious step closer, compelled yet careful, as though approaching a wild bird that might take flight at the wrong gesture. She shifted her sketchbook, subtly inviting space at the bench. He sat, not too close, not too far, and for a long while neither spoke. They simply existed, side by side, two lives orbiting toward an inevitable crossing. When words finally came, they were not the kind that cluttered or filled silence for the sake of it. He asked what she was drawing, his voice gentle, textured with warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket against the evening chill. She tilted her sketchbook slightly, showing him the unfinished outline of the bridge before them. He studied it with genuine interest, not because of the structure, but because it was hers, an extension of her hidden world. She expected him to praise or to critique, but he did neither. Instead, he said quietly, "It feels alive, like it's breathing." Her breath caught. No one had ever seen her work that way. In his words, she felt not just validation, but understanding. And for him, in her startled softness, he felt a quiet triumph, as though he had managed to step into a corner of her heart no one else had reached. The sky deepened into indigo, street lamps flickering awake one by one, casting halos of golden light across the path. They talked then, not of grand things, but of small truths, favorite colors. The comfort of rain. The way silence could sometimes say more than words. With each exchange, threads began to weave, fragile yet undeniable, binding them with the tender strength of beginnings. The river whispered nearby, its rhythm echoing the quiet expansion of something new, something warm, something neither of them had expected. As the evening grew colder, he offered his jacket, and she almost refused out of habit. Yet the way he draped it gently around her shoulders wasn't an act of pity, but of care, a gesture that carried no weight except kindness. Wrapped in its warmth, she realized how long it had been since she'd let herself be cared for. He didn't know her past, the heaviness she carried, the broken places she tried to hide, and she didn't know his. But in the dim glow of streetlights, with the city quieting around them, they both knew this. Some meetings are not accidents. They are the universe's gentle insistence that hearts need mending, that healing often begins with the courage to look up and meet another's eyes. If you feel the quiet comfort of this beginning, if some part of your soul finds warmth in their encounter, let your heart guide you. Like, leave a gentle comment or subscribe to stay as this story unfolds. Every word ahead will be a step deeper into their journey, and perhaps in their healing you may find a reflection of your own. And as the night finally settled over the river, their story did not end with the closing of her sketchbook. It had only just begun, a thread now woven into the vast fabric of love, resilience, and the kind of gentle hope that lingers long after the last page is turned, leading seamlessly toward the next chapter waiting in the quiet hush of tomorrow. The following day carried with it a softer light, as if the world itself remembered the fragile beginning of something tender and chose to nurture it. She woke early, the memory of his presence lingering like a half-finished dream, delicate yet impossible to shake away. As she sat by her window, the morning air cool and scented faintly of lavender from the garden below, she traced her fingers across the edges of the sketchbook she had carried the night before. The page still bore the incomplete outline of the bridge, smudged slightly where water from the river breeze had touched it. Yet somehow it no longer felt unfinished. His words, that her drawing seemed alive, had turned even her mistakes into something sacred, something worth keeping. He, too, awoke with the quiet weight of yesterday's encounter. For years, mornings had been mechanical to him, a ritual of coffee, unread newspapers, and the hollow routine of responsibilities that filled but never satisfied. But this morning was different. He found himself pausing longer at the window, watching how sunlight settled on rooftops, listening to the distant laughter of schoolchildren passing by. It was as if his senses had sharpened, as though her presence had reminded him that the world was not just to be endured, but to be felt. By chance, or perhaps by some invisible thread, both found themselves drawn back to the riverside. She carried her sketchbook again, though she wasn't sure if she had come to draw or to wait. He carried no purpose beyond the quiet hope that she might be there. And when their paths crossed once more, there was no surprise in their eyes, only recognition, as if they had both known it would happen. The bench was theirs again, a sanctuary carved out of ordinary space. This time, conversation flowed more easily, no longer fragile, but steady, like the river's current. She spoke of the things she loved, old novels whose pages smelled of dust and time, the way autumn leaves crunched beneath her shoes, the comfort of a piano melody drifting through open windows. He listened not with polite nods, but with the kind of attention that warmed her more than sunlight could. When he spoke, it was of his own quiet passions, how he loved the scent of rain on stone, how certain songs felt like prayers, how sometimes silence was the only truth worth sharing. Their words were not extraordinary, but they stitched something intimate between them. Healing does not always arrive with fanfare. Often it comes in simple exchanges, in the safety of being seen without judgment. She felt her heart loosen, like a bird testing its wings after too long in confinement. He felt the tightness in his chest ease, a reminder that connection could be gentle, not demanding. As hours slipped by, they wandered beyond the bench. Together they walked the riverside path, pausing often as she pointed out hidden details in the city he had never noticed before. The cracked mosaic beneath an old fountain, the ivy curling like a secret signature across brick walls, the faint outline of initials carved into a tree long ago. To her, every detail was a story waiting to be told. To him, every detail was a reflection of how she saw the world, patiently, tenderly, with a devotion that made the ordinary luminous. At one point, she stopped before a florist's shop whose windows overflowed with blooms. The fragrance spilled into the street, and she lingered, her eyes caught by a cluster of wild daisies. He noticed the way she looked at them, not with desire to possess, but with a reverence for their simplicity. Without a word, he stepped inside, and moments later returned with a small bouquet. She tried to protest, but he only placed it gently into her hands. It wasn't a grand gesture, but something quieter, a recognition of what mattered to her. She pressed the flowers to her chest, whispering thank you, her voice almost breaking with how healing it felt to be thought of in such a pure way. The afternoon drifted into evening. As shadows grew longer, they found themselves at the steps of a chapel whose doors were open. Music spilled out. An organ rehearsal, notes rising and falling like waves. Without speaking, they entered. Inside, colored light streamed through stained glass, washing them both in hues of ruby and sapphire. They sat near the back, silence wrapping around them, not as a barrier, but as a balm. The music swelled, and she closed her eyes, letting it fill the places in her heart that had long been aching. He watched her, not intrusively, but with awe at the way she surrendered so freely to beauty. When the final chord faded, she opened her eyes and found him still looking at her. For once, she did not shy away. Their gazes held, and in the sacred hush of that chapel, something unspoken deepened between them. It was not yet love, not yet confession, but a promise, the kind that takes root quietly, growing stronger in silence, until it cannot be denied. Outside, the world had turned to twilight. They walked together toward the edge of the square, where lanterns flickered to life. She held the daisies, and he carried the memory of her smile like a secret flame. Before parting, he asked softly if she would be at the riverside again. She answered with a nod, her cheeks warm, her heart steadier than it had been in years. As she disappeared into the glow of the lanterns, and he stood watching until she was out of sight, both carried a strange peace within them. It was the kind of peace that heals slowly, reminding them that even after long winters of solitude, spring always arrives. Their story was still in its earliest bloom, fragile but certain, each step carrying them closer to the inevitable unfolding of hearts that had waited too long to be found. And so the evening closed, not with an ending, but with a beginning disguised as farewell, leading seamlessly toward the next chapter of a journey that promised to entwine them deeper into love, resilience, and the gentle miracle of belonging. Rain fell softly against the city the next day, the kind of gentle rain that did not rush but lingered, washing every surface with a tender rhythm. She sat by the cafe window, her sketchbook open, though her pencil lay untouched. The world outside blurred into watercolor through droplets on the glass, and though the streets bustled with umbrellas and hurried footsteps, she felt cocooned in a quiet sanctuary. Yet there was an ache beneath the calm, a weight she often carried alone. The accident years ago, the long days of recovery, the whispers behind her back, these things had shaped her, carved into her spirit both resilience and scars. She had grown used to holding them silently, hiding the pain beneath layers of composure. He entered with the smell of rain clinging to his coat, shaking droplets from his hair as the door chimed softly. She looked up, surprised, though her heart had been waiting. He spotted her instantly, his expression brightening as though the entire room existed solely because she was in it. Without hesitation, he walked over and sat across from her, bringing the warmth of his presence like a hearth fire against the chill. "You look like you've been listening to the rain instead of drawing," he said, voice low, almost a murmur. She smiled faintly, acknowledging his truth. He had a way of noticing the small things, of speaking directly into the quiet spaces she thought invisible. They spoke little at first, letting the sound of rain fill the silence. Then, slowly, words trickled out. She told him about her art, the way drawing had saved her when she felt the world turning away, how each line was less about beauty and more about healing. He listened without interruption, his gaze steady, not with pity, but with admiration, as though her confessions were treasures entrusted to him. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel weak for revealing herself. She felt understood. He leaned back, his own expression shadowed. "There are things I've never said aloud," he admitted, "things I've carried for years, pretending they don't weigh me down." His hands tightened briefly around his coffee cup before relaxing. "I lost someone once, not in death, but in distance. I thought I could protect them, but in the end, I was the one who drove them away." The honesty in his tone was raw, threaded with regret. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand gently. It was not an attempt to erase his pain, but to share it, to remind him he wasn't alone in the remembering. He looked at her, startled at first, then softened. In her touch, he found no judgment, only quiet acceptance. That single gesture felt like balm over wounds he had long kept hidden. Healing, he realized, was not always a solitary act. It was often born in the simple courage of letting someone else hold your pain. The rain thickened outside, and the cafe grew more intimate as candles flickered on each table. He noticed the slight tremor in her hand when she picked up her cup, the way she quickly masked it. Without pressing, he asked softly, "Does it still hurt?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Every day in different ways, but I keep moving. Some days it feels like I'm surviving. Other days, I remember what living feels like." Her voice cracked, but her eyes held steady. He wanted to promise her a world free of pain, but he knew better. Instead, he said, "Then let's find the days worth living, together." It was not grand, not wrapped in vows, but it was real. His words slipped into her heart like light seeping through cracks, fragile yet undeniable. When the rain slowed, They left the cafe side by side, walking beneath the same umbrella. The city glistened with reflections, puddles mirroring lantern light. She laughed when her shoes splashed into water, and he laughed with her, not at her, the sound easing the weight of the day. In that laughter, they felt something shift, less like strangers, more like two souls discovering the rhythm of each other's steps. Their walk led them back to the riverside, the same place where their story had begun. The air was fresh, the sky streaked with fading silver clouds. She set her sketchbook on the bench, and for the first time invited him to draw something beside her. Awkwardly, he accepted, pencil in hand, his lines clumsy but earnest. She guided him gently, their shoulders brushing, her laughter soft when his bridge tilted too far. Yet she praised him anyway, because what mattered was not the perfection of the drawing, but the intimacy of sharing creation. As night wrapped itself around the city, lanterns glowed on the water's surface, and their unfinished sketch lay between them, a bridge drawn with two different hands, uneven yet whole. She looked at him, realizing the metaphor wasn't lost. Two lives scarred, yet together creating something imperfectly beautiful. He looked back, sensing the same truth, and in that gaze there was no need for declarations. Love was not sudden fireworks, but the slow, steady flame of trust lit quietly in the heart until it became impossible to ignore. The air grew cooler, and he draped his coat around her once more. She leaned into its warmth, this time without resistance. For the first time in years, she did not feel defined by what she had lost, but by what she was beginning to find. Healing had begun, not as an end, but as a journey, one she no longer had to walk alone. And as they left the riverside together, their steps fell in rhythm, carrying them toward the next chapter, where affection would deepen, trials would come, but so too would the certainty that some encounters were never accidents. They were quiet miracles, unfolding in the most ordinary of places. Autumn crept in quietly, with its golden leaves spiraling down from the trees and the crisp air carrying the scent of earth and wood smoke. For her, the season had always been bittersweet, a reminder of endings, of years where she had felt the loneliness more sharply than ever. Yet now, with him by her side, autumn felt less like decay and more like transformation. The leaves no longer looked like dying fragments, but like small flames lighting the path ahead. They had grown closer in ways neither had anticipated. Their meetings by the river and in the cafe had become an unspoken rhythm of their days. It was never arranged, yet somehow they always found themselves drifting to the same places, as though invisible strings pulled them together. She noticed how easily his presence soothed her, the way her breath evened out when he spoke, the way her worries softened when he simply listened. He noticed how she brought color to the mundane, how her laughter made even silence feel alive, how her way of seeing the world reminded him that beauty could be found in broken places. One evening, the two of them wandered beyond the familiar streets and stumbled into a park glowing with lanterns strung between the trees. A festival was underway, the laughter of children mingling with the music of violins. He saw the way her eyes lit up at the sight of it, the way her lips curved in wonder. She had spent so many years looking at joy from the outside as if it belonged to others. Now he offered his hand, palm open, and she placed hers in it. Together they stepped into the light. They moved through stalls of handmade crafts and warm pastries, through crowds of strangers who seemed like distant stars in a vast constellation. He bought her roasted chestnuts, and she teased him for burning his tongue when he bit too quickly. She tried on a silver bracelet from a vendor, and he fastened it around her wrist with unexpected gentleness, his fingers brushing against her skin in a way that sent warmth spiraling through her chest. For the first time, she felt the pulse of being alive in a world that invited her to belong. Later, as the music swelled, couples began to dance beneath the lanterns. She hesitated, her hand tightening on his. "I don't—" she began, her voice faltering, the weight of memory tugging at her. Dancing was something she hadn't dared since her body had changed, since movements that were once graceful now felt broken. He looked at her, reading the hesitation not as refusal, but as fear. Without words, he led her gently to the edge of the crowd, away from eyes that might judge. "I'm not asking for perfection," he whispered, holding her hand. "Just trust me." And she did. His arm encircled her with quiet strength, guiding her not into complicated steps, but into simple sways in time with the music. At first her body resisted, stiff with the memory of pain, but gradually she let go. Their movements became less about dancing and more about feeling, about the healing rhythm of closeness. The lantern light flickered across their faces, and for a fleeting moment the world narrowed to the warmth between them. She leaned into him, her cheek brushing his shoulder, and for the first time she did not feel fragile. She felt held. When the music ended, they didn't separate immediately. They lingered, reluctant to let go, knowing something had shifted irreversibly. She looked up, her eyes reflecting both fear and gratitude, and he smiled as though promising silently, "You are not broken, you are whole, and I see all of you." The walk home that night was quieter, filled with a kind of peace that words could not touch. She clutched the silver bracelet, its weight a reminder of his presence, while he carried the memory of her leaning against him as though it had always been her place. In their silence there was healing, the kind that seeps slowly into the soul until it becomes part of the fabric of who you are. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened. He began to share more of himself, stories of his past, the mistakes that haunted him, the loneliness that had shaped his nights. She listened, never interrupting, and in her listening he felt forgiven in ways he had never forgiven himself. She too entrusted him with her fragility, the nights when pain in her body flared and she felt weaker than she wished to be, the memories of being abandoned by those who could not see past her scars. He never recoiled. Instead, he stayed, steady as a lighthouse, reminding her that her worth was never diminished by the storms she endured. One afternoon, they returned to the riverside where their story had begun. The trees along the bank were ablaze with autumn colors, their reflection shimmering on the water. She sketched the scene, while he sat beside her, pretending to read, but watching her instead. "You always draw as if the world deserves to be remembered," he said quietly. She paused, pencil hovering, and replied, "Maybe it does. Maybe even the broken parts deserve to be seen as beautiful." He touched her hand lightly, guiding the pencil with her, and whispered, "So do you." The words pierced her heart, not with pain, but with healing. For years she had thought of herself as incomplete, as someone surviving rather than thriving. Yet, in his eyes, in his voice, she was whole, beautiful, not in spite of her scars, but because of them. She turned to him, and for a moment the air between them stilled. His hand lingered on hers, his gaze unwavering, and she knew that whatever lay ahead, this was no longer just a fleeting connection. This was the beginning of love, gentle, steady, unyielding. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water, and their hearts, though still cautious, leaned closer to each other with every breath. The river whispered as it always did, carrying their silence forward into tomorrow, where love would take deeper root, where challenges would come, but where healing would continue to bloom. Their story was no longer just two lives intersecting. It was a journey becoming one, flowing seamlessly into the next chapter that awaited them. Spring carried with it the kind of promise that arrived quietly, yet transformed everything it touched. The earth was soft again, the air rich with scents of lilac and rain. She sat by the train window, her eyes wide as the countryside unfolded in a quilt of green and yellow. He sat across from her, the careful protector and constant witness, though now his gaze carried more ease, less of the restless solitude he once wore. They were travelling together to the gallery in the other city, the place where her art would finally be seen by strangers whose eyes had never known her name. Each mile drew them closer to a moment she had once dreamed of, yet secretly feared. To be seen fully, without the shield of invisibility she had lived behind for too long. The gallery space itself was high-ceilinged, washed in white light that poured from skylights like a gentle blessing. When her canvases were uncrated, she felt her breath catch. There they were, bridges, rivers, horizons, fragments of her soul made tangible. She had painted them in silence, alone in her studio, believing they were only for herself. Yet now they stood before her like companions, ready to speak for her when words failed. He placed his hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. "They already know your story," he whispered, "even before you say a word." Opening night was a storm of unfamiliar voices and footsteps. People moved slowly through the space, pausing before each piece as though listening to something she had left behind in brushstrokes. She watched from the edges, unsure, her heart thudding. He stayed near enough for her to feel his presence, but far enough to let her be seen on her own. A woman paused at a canvas of the riverbank under autumn light, tears trembling in her eyes. She turned to her husband and whispered, "It feels like it remembers me." Those words undid her. She realized then that her art was no longer only hers. It was a mirror for the hidden stories of others. Later, when the crowd thinned and the room softened into a hum, he approached her quietly. "How do you feel?" She let out a shaky laugh. "Exposed, alive, as if the pieces I thought were wounds have become something whole." He smiled, touched her hand lightly, and said, "Healing looks good on you." She leaned into his chest, not caring that they were still in public. For years she had feared being visible, but tonight visibility was freedom, and his embrace was proof she was no longer standing alone beneath the weight of her story. The days that followed stitched themselves into memory. They explored the new city between gallery visits, narrow alleys with musicians playing violins, bakeries spilling the smell of cinnamon, gardens tucked between brick walls. She carried her sketchbook everywhere, catching the curve of rooftops, the laughter of strangers, the play of light on windows. He teased her for stopping every few steps, but secretly he adored it. Watching her notice the world so intently taught him to notice it too. Together they became students of beauty, and every detail they gathered stitched another thread into the fabric of their bond. One afternoon, they stumbled upon a quiet park with a fountain at its center, water scattering sunlight into 1,000 fragments. She sat at its edge, sketching, while he lay back on the grass, watching clouds drift like ships. He spoke softly, not to break the peace. "Do you ever think we were meant to find each other like this? Not in lightning, but in a steady flame?" She lowered her pencil, meeting his gaze. "I don't think fate shouted. I think it whispered until we listened." His chest tightened at her words. They felt like truth wrapped in gentleness. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with ease, the kind of touch that did not need to prove anything. Yet even in this season of joy, old shadows flickered. One night she woke from a dream of the accident, the crash that had changed her body, her life, her future. She sat up, trembling, the memory too vivid. He woke immediately, sensing her absence even in sleep. Without asking, he gathered her into his arms, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "You're here," he murmured, "and you are safe." She clung to him, breathing through the echoes of pain until her trembling eased. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He simply stayed, his presence a quiet lighthouse guiding her back from the storm inside. In the hush of that night, she realized healing was not forgetting. It was learning that she was no longer alone when the memories came. In return, she became his anchor when he faltered. He sometimes spoke of the person he had once lost, the guilt he carried like an old scar. She listened without judgment, without the need to fix. "Pain doesn't make you unworthy," she told him. "It just means you've lived deeply." Those words, so simple, felt like water poured over dry soil. With her, his shame became lighter, less of a chain and more of a reminder that even broken paths can lead to new ground. The final day of the exhibition arrived, and with it came something unexpected. An award given by the city's art council, recognizing her not just for skill, but for courage. When her name was announced, applause filled the hall. She froze, overwhelmed, until she felt his hand slip into hers. She walked forward slowly, the chain around her neck, the ring he had given, glinting in the lights. Accepting the award, she looked out over the crowd, her voice trembling but clear. "I once thought the world had no place for me after I was broken. But art reminded me that brokenness is not the end, it is a doorway. And sometimes, if you are very fortunate, someone walks through it with you." When they returned to the riverside weeks later, back in their own city, spring had deepened into early summer. The water shimmered in evening light, birds danced low above the surface, and the bench where they had first met was waiting like an old friend. They sat together in silence for a long while, listening to the hum of life around them. She opened her sketchbook, turning to a fresh page. This time, instead of the bridge or the river, she began to sketch his face. He laughed softly at the thought, but she only said, "This is the view that healed me." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. "Then, let me spend my life giving you views worth sketching." Her chest tightened, her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she smiled through them. Love, she realized, was not the grand gestures, but this, the quiet promise of showing up, of choosing each other in every season, of turning even pain into something luminous. As twilight painted the river in gold and violet, they leaned into each other, not needing words. Their story was not about perfection, but about persistence, resilience. and the healing warmth of love that grows slowly yet surely. The bench, the river, the city, all bore witness to a love that had begun in silence and now sang softly, endlessly, like water moving toward the sea. If you've walked with them this far, let your heart leave a trace. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps in their healing, you've found a reflection of your own. Every story continues when it is held, and together we can carry this one further into the light. Summer unfolded like a long exhale, the kind that carries warmth through every pore of the city and wraps the evenings in gold. The riverbanks shimmered beneath the sun, alive with laughter and footsteps, yet their favorite bench remained their private sanctuary. They had grown accustomed to this rhythm of togetherness, not a schedule, not an obligation, but an instinct. Wherever she was, his presence seemed near. Wherever he walked, her voice lingered in his thoughts. Love had woven itself so seamlessly into their days that neither remembered what silence had felt like before it. Their closeness now stretched into new territories of tenderness. She began to leave sketches, tucked secretly into his pockets, tiny portraits of birds, wildflowers, or fragments of the city he loved. He would discover them at odd hours, pulling out a folded slip of paper in the middle of a meeting or while reading in the park, and each drawing was like a heartbeat pressed into his palm. In return, he began writing her letters on cream-colored paper, sealed and slipped into her sketchbook when she wasn't looking. His words were not always polished. Sometimes they were messy, full of crossed-out lines, but they carried the raw weight of honesty. "You've made me believe in gentle things again," one letter read. She pressed that one between the pages of her journal, returning to it whenever fear whispered too loudly. Yet love is never without its shadows. One evening, beneath the rose-tinted glow of sunset, she confessed her fear of permanence. "What if I can't keep up with the world you dream of?" she asked, voice small, fragile as glass. Her wheelchair was beside her, the quiet reminder of battles she fought daily. She braced herself for pity, for the silence she had known from others before. But he only knelt before her, taking her hands as if they were sacred relics. "The world I dream of," he said, "is the one we build together, at whatever pace you choose." She broke then, not from pain but from relief, her tears soaking into his shirt as he held her. Healing bloomed in that moment, soft and irrevocable, the understanding that she was not a burden, but a home. As summer deepened, they travelled again, this time not for exhibitions or duties, but simply for joy. They boarded a train to the coast, watching fields roll past like endless brushstrokes. When the sea appeared, vast and glittering, she gasped as though seeing it for the first time. Waves stretched out like an eternal horizon, and the air was alive with salt. He carried her down to the sand, refusing to let the uneven ground deny her. They spent hours there, building a fortress of seashells and laughter, eating peaches so ripe the juice stained their fingers. At night they lay beneath a canopy of stars, and she whispered, "This sky feels like forgiveness." He kissed her hair and replied, "Then let it forgive us both, for all the years we thought we had to be alone." The sea became their cathedral. Each tide was a hymn, each sunrise a benediction. She sketched the shifting waves while he wrote fragments of poems in the margins of her notebook. Together they built a shared language of memory, moments too vast to contain, yet too fragile to risk forgetting. And every time the water touched their feet, she felt lighter, as though the tide itself was carrying away remnants of grief she no longer needed. Healing, she realized, was not only in the absence of pain, but in the presence of joy so radiant it outshone the darkness. When they returned to the city, their bond felt steadier than ever. Friends began to notice it in the way their gazes sought each other across a room, in how silence between them was never awkward, but filled with trust. She began teaching small art classes to children, inspired by his encouragement, while he started writing essays again, finding courage in her belief. Their lives no longer ran on parallel tracks. They were weaving into one fabric, each thread holding the other firm. Still, life tested them. One afternoon, she collapsed in the studio, the summer heat overwhelming her fragile body. Fear seized him like a blade as he rushed her to the hospital. He stayed by her side all night, refusing to sleep, holding her hand as machines whispered around them. In those hours, he confronted the raw truth. Love was not about ease, but endurance. When she finally woke, pale but smiling weakly, she whispered, "I thought you might leave." His voice broke as he answered, "There is no place in this world I could go that would be away from you." In her exhaustion, she laughed softly, and the sound was like balm poured over every wound of the night. Recovery was slow, but it became their shared project. He cooked soups, clumsy but full of care. She teased him, calling his bread bricks, but ate every slice. They filled evenings with music, lying together in the living room while the ceiling fan hummed above. She healed not just because her body allowed it, but because her heart knew she was safe in his devotion. And he healed too, of his old loneliness, of guilt that once weighed him down, because she let him be her anchor. By the end of summer, they returned to their bench by the river. The water moved gently, reflecting the orange glow of twilight. She set her sketchbook aside and looked at him with a steadiness that made his heart still. "You've given me more than I ever thought I could have," she said. "Not just love, but freedom. The freedom to believe I deserve it." He reached for her, cupping her face with both hands, his eyes wet. "And you've given me back my life. You've reminded me that even broken things can sing." They kissed then, slowly, tenderly, as the city's night unfurled around them. It was not the kiss of a beginning, but of a vow, silent, binding, unshakable. When they pulled apart, the world felt brighter, as if even the stars had leaned closer to witness. Their story was not about perfection. It was about persistence, resilience, and the gentle kind of love that turns scars into constellations. They knew harder days would come, but they also knew that together they could outlast them, because healing was no longer an individual journey, it was theirs. And as the night closed around the river, they sat hand in hand, breathing as one. Their future stretched before them like the horizon at sea, infinite and alive, waiting to be painted with every shade of love they had yet to discover. If this chapter has touched something tender within you, let your heart respond. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing what healing means to you. Your voice is part of this journey too, and together we can keep carrying stories of hope, love, and gentle light into the world. The first crisp breath of autumn returned, as though the world had been turning just to bring them here, to this season where endings and beginnings coexist in the same golden light. Leaves tumbled down in slow spirals, drifting like letters written by the sky itself. She sat by the window of their favorite café, sketchbook open, eyes following the play of color outside. He arrived moments later, bringing with him the scent of rain and roasted chestnuts, placing a cup of her favorite tea on the table before saying a word. Their silences had become fluent, as rich as conversation, and in them bloomed the kind of trust that cannot be forced, only grown slowly through seasons of staying. Life had woven them into a rhythm of love that was not loud but steady. Mornings began with sunlight slanting across shared coffee cups and ended with the comfort of knowing the other would be there again tomorrow. Yet this season carried with it new challenges, subtle and uninvited. His work began pulling him into long hours, and her health faltered with the damp chill creeping in. Some evenings she sat by herself, sketching the river while waiting for him, her chest tightening with fear that love, no matter how tender, could be fragile against the demands of the world. When he arrived weary and late, guilt etched in his eyes, she would smile and insist she was fine, though her voice betrayed her longing for his presence. One night, however, the unspoken broke open. He found her curled on the bench by the river, sketchbook forgotten at her side, shoulders trembling in the autumn air. He rushed to her, heart thudding, and she whispered through tears, "I'm afraid of being left behind, afraid that the world will ask too much of you, and I will not be enough to keep." His chest ached at the weight of her words. He knelt beside her, cupping her cold hands in his. "Listen," he said softly. "Love is not measured by hours given to the world. It is measured here between us. Even when I am pulled away, you are the center I return to. You are not a burden. You are the reason I keep going." She sobbed then, not from despair, but from release. Healing sometimes comes in tears, in letting fears spill into the open where they can no longer grow in shadow. He pulled her against him, wrapping his coat around her, holding her as though she were the most fragile and most precious thing he had ever known. "If ever you doubt," he whispered into her hair, "look at my hands, look at my eyes. They are yours. They have always been yours." The river shimmered nearby, carrying the echoes of his vow like a song into the night. In the days that followed, they learned again the art of balance. He carved out sacred hours just for them, no matter the demands of work. She allowed herself to rest openly in his care, no longer hiding her exhaustion behind a mask of strength. They found solace in shared rituals, long walks under canopies of amber leaves, afternoons spent in the studio where she sketched while he read aloud passages from books, evenings curled together beneath blankets while rain pattered against the windows. Every small act became a thread woven into their shared fabric, each one a reminder that love was not undone by the world's noise, but strengthened by their choice to keep turning back toward each other. Autumn deepened, and with it came a festival by the river. Lanterns strung from tree to tree, music swelling from violins and drums, laughter floating like smoke into the night sky. He guided her through the crowd gently, making space for her wheelchair, ensuring she could see every flicker of light. When they reached the river's edge, hundreds of lanterns were released onto the water, bobbing away like stars set free. She watched them with wide eyes, whispering, "It looks like hope." He leaned close, replying, "It is hope." Yours, mine, ours, floating forward, refusing to sink. He pressed a lantern into her hands, and together they lit it, their fingers brushing as the flame came alive. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing a wish not for herself, but for him. that his burdens would lighten, that his heart would always know it was loved. When they set the lantern on the water, it drifted gently away, its glow joining the constellation of others. He watched her, not the lantern, and thought she shone brighter than anything reflected in the river. Later, as music swelled again, he drew her into a quiet corner of the square. "Dance with me," he said softly. She hesitated, pain flickering in her eyes, but he held her hand with such reverence that she could not refuse. He guided her gently, moving with her chair, swaying in rhythm with her, making the dance not about steps, but about closeness. People passing by slowed to watch, not with pity, but with wonder, as the two of them carved a small sanctuary of love in the midst of the festival. She laughed through her tears, realizing that love did not demand perfection, it only demanded presence. When the night ended and they returned to their bench by the river, they sat in silence, watching the last lanterns drift out of sight. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and whispered, "Even if the world forgets us, this love will not be forgotten. It heals me every day." He kissed the crown of her head, replying softly, "It heals me too." Their story had become a mosaic, pieces of joy, pain, resilience, and tenderness, all fitted together into something larger than either of them alone. Love, they had learned, was not the absence of struggle, but the decision to remain through it, to choose again and again to walk together, even when the path bent unexpectedly. And as autumn's wind curled around them, carrying the scent of wood smoke and rain, they knew that whatever winter brought, they would face it as one. If this moment touched your heart, let it linger by leaving a like, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Every word you share is another lantern set afloat, carrying light further than you may know. Join this journey, and let us continue weaving healing and love together. Winter arrived softly at first, a hush settling over the city as though the world itself held its breath. The river, once alive with color and lantern light, now shimmered in silver quiet. Frost painted lace onto window panes, and the air carried that sharp, invigorating clarity that made each inhale feel like beginning again. They had lived through seasons together now, spring's awakening, summer's freedom, autumn's lessons, and winter felt less like an ending than a threshold, a place where they could look back at what they had built and forward at what still waited for them. She often sat by the fire in her studio, sketchbook open, the soft crackle of flames mingling with the steady sound of his pen scratching across paper. He had begun to write more earnestly, essays and reflections that carried the fingerprints of their love, though he never admitted it directly. She teased him about his furrowed brow, the way he chewed the end of his pen when searching for words, while he teased her about the way she hummed unconsciously when shading the sky into her drawings. These domestic intimacies became their warmth against the cold outside, rituals stitched into their days, quiet and unremarkable to anyone else, but everything to them. Yet winter, with all its beauty, brought challenges. Her body weakened under the strain of the season, pain flaring sharper with the cold. There were mornings she struggled to rise, evenings when exhaustion wrapped around her like chains. She hated the fragility, the way it seemed to test not only her body, but her faith in herself. But he was there, steady, patient, his love like a healing thread woven through every moment of weakness. He would kneel beside her chair, lifting her gently when she faltered, and whisper, You are not broken. You are enduring. That is strength. Those words, repeated softly, became her shield against despair. One stormy night, when snow fell heavy and the streets grew silent, they decided to walk anyway, wrapped in layers of scarves and coats. The city was deserted, every rooftop capped in white, every lamppost haloed by frost. He pushed her chair slowly down the middle of the street, their laughter echoing strangely in the emptiness. "It feels like the world belongs to us," she said, her cheeks pink from the cold. He grinned, snowflakes clinging to his hair, and replied, "Maybe it always has. We just had to see it this way." They paused beneath a streetlight, snowflakes falling like stars around them, and kissed in the stillness, the warmth of their love defying the chill. It was not just romance. It was defiance, healing and belonging carved into a frozen night. As winter deepened, holidays arrived, bringing gatherings, lights, and the tenderness of tradition. For the first time in years, she felt ready to share him with her closest circle. He met her family, stepping into the home that still carried echoes of her childhood. At first, she trembled with fear, that they would see her as fragile, that he would see her through their eyes and discover reasons to pull away. But instead, she watched as he spoke to her father with quiet respect, helped her mother carry dishes, knelt to play cards with her young niece, and listened to stories told by her grandmother. Later, as they left, her grandmother pressed her hand and whispered, "He loves you with gentleness. That is rare. Keep it." Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from the healing of being seen, accepted, celebrated, not in spite of her scars, but with them. In the hush of late nights, they began to talk of futures, not as dreams too fragile to hold, but as plans woven with care. "What if we lived by the sea one day?" she asked, eyes shining as she remembered the waves. "What if we built a studio there, wide windows facing the horizon?" He smiled, already picturing it, already willing to shape his world around hers. "Then let the sea hear us now," he answered, "because if you dream it, I'll carry the tools to build it." These conversations were not fanciful. They were blueprints written in love's steady ink. Promises made not of grand gestures, but of daily devotion. One evening, as snowflakes brushed the windows, he pulled out a small wooden box. Her breath caught, her heart racing. Inside lay not a jeweled ring, but a simple silver band, smooth and unadorned. "This isn't about tradition," he said, voice trembling slightly. "This is about choosing you, every day, in every season, with every breath I have. Will you let me?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, "I already have, every day since the river." They held each other then, no audience but the crackling fire and the falling snow, sealing a vow that needed no ceremony, only their hearts, steady and intertwined. Winter did not end their story. It polished it, refined it, revealed its strength. Together they learned that healing was not a destination but a way of living, choosing to love through pain, through change, through uncertainty. They had built something rare, a love both fierce and gentle, a sanctuary where neither had to hide, where broken pieces became mosaics of resilience. As the season edged toward spring, they returned once more to the river. It shimmered now with patches of ice, the water beneath restless and alive. They sat on their bench, hands entwined, watching the light shift across the horizon. "Everything changes," she murmured. Yes, he replied softly, but not us, not this. And in that moment, beneath the healing hush of winter's last breath, they knew that their love was no longer a beginning. It was an eternal flame, burning through every season to come. If this chapter has touched your heart, let its warmth ripple further. Like this story, subscribe to join the journey and share your reflections in the comments. Each word you leave is another spark of healing, another lantern set afloat on the river of love. Together, let's keep this light alive.